I'd like to welcome you to a webinar on global mental health research. My name is Michael Pluess, and I'm a professor in psychology at the University of Surrey in the UK, and I'm the founder and director of our global mental health research group. In today's webinar, we will introduce our new website on global mental health research and present findings from 3 recent publications. We have been involved in global mental health research for the last 10 years. Much of our work is related to the BioPath project, a large-scale study on risk and resilience among Syrian refugee children living in Lebanon. The BioPath study and associated projects all reflect collaborations with various partners such as IDRAC in Lebanon, Doctors of the World, Johns Hopkins University and American University of Beirut, just to mention a few. And our work has been generously funded by the NSCHD, the European Commission, R2HC and UKRI, to mention some. We recently developed a dedicated website to disseminate research outcomes from the BioPath and related projects, but also to provide information on how the data can be accessed for those interested in collaboration. Before we continue, I'd like to quickly go over the program. This welcome and introduction by myself. This is followed by a presentation of the website. This is led by Claudinei, Biazoli, Annisha, Attanayake, and Dr. Andrew May. And then we'll go into the first presentation of the first paper, which is going to be presented by myself on supporting the mental health of forcibly displaced children. That's based on a review paper. Then the second presentation is on a paper on father separation and well-being amongst displaced children by Dr. Hend Eltanamly. And then the last presentation is on sensitivity in Syrian refugee children by Dr. Andrew May. And then we'll end, hopefully on time, with myself, providing a farewell. And then just the publications that are being discussed in this webinar include a recent publication in Nature Review Psychology, then a paper that got published last year in Attachment and Human Development on father separation, and the very recent paper that just got published in Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry. So at this stage, I'd like to hand over to Claudinei Biazoli from the Federal University of ABC in Brazil, who will share a little bit about the history of and the purpose of the website. Thank you, Claudinei.
Much, Michael. Thank you all for joining us today for the launch of this website. So it's a pleasure to introduce you the Global Mental Health Research.com website, which is part of the BioPath study and is supported by the Caring Trauma project as well. This website is meant to be a tool to facilitate a shared commitment to advance our scientific understanding of the mental health needs of children and families that are affected by war and displacement. BioPath project in particular focus on children and families living in Lebanon in informal settlements and refugees from the Syrian war. And we deeply appreciate the support of the European Commission under the Horizon Europe framework to the Caring Trauma project, which makes possible to set up this website. So I would like to pass over to Annisha, which she will present with more details this new initiative. Thank you, Annisha.
Thank you, Claudinei. I'll share my screen. So this is, sorry about that. So this is the homepage of the Global Mental Health Research website, where you can find information about what the research includes. You'll see excerpts from the blog, which have been published onto the website, as well as the listed partners and funders of the research that has been conducted. And at the very bottom, you'll see the option to join our monthly newsletter with your email address, as well as some quick links, such as the logout for or login for members, the privacy policy, and the sitemap. So if I go back to the top, you'll see our About Us section, which lists the team involved in the development and the management of this website, and a little bit about them, including their research interests. And then we also have the research tab, which includes projects, publications, and data. So if I go to the projects site, you'll see our research projects, including the Biopath study, the VAST study, and the T-CETA study. So if I click on one of them, it provides a short description of the study, including its aims, data collection, the research partners, funding, and if a webinar has been published as well. And you'll also see the related projects which use the data from the research project, so Biopath in this case. So if you click on it, here you'll see a brief description of the related project, including team collaborators and funding. And then you'll also see the listed members involved within the research team. And then if we go to research publications, on this tab, it lists all of the publications within each of the research projects. So we have Biopath, T-CETA, VAST 3EA report, and other publications. And again, if you click on one of them, you'll see the author, the journal where you'll find the publication, as well as the link to the website as well. And then you'll also see the abstract as well for those publications. And then if we go back, you'll see the data section here, which Andrew May will discuss in a short while. And then next to research tab, we have the blogs, which are based on all of the publications listed on the website. And initially you see the excerpts of the blogs like before, and you can access them as well based on their categories and month of publication. So if we click on one of them, you'll see the authors of the blog, key message of the blog, and then a short, accessible summary of the publication. And it'll often include links to relevant websites as well. And you'll also see at the bottom about the study group, any references, and then link to the publication and any media involved as well. And if we then go back to the top, you'll then see the newsletter tab next to it. And for this, you can use your email address to subscribe to a monthly newsletter, which will include 2 of the blogs which are published on the website, as well as any latest updates and news on publications and research. And then next, we have the members portal, which Andrew May will talk through, including about the data section of this as well. So I'll pass you to Andrew May now.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the data subsection of the research tab to begin with. So for increased transparency and to help foster collaboration, we want to make sure that the data from our various projects are available to other interested academics and various parties, but we want to do this in an ethically responsible way. So if you are interested in these data, after you've seen some of our results in today's webinar, you'll be able to click on the data tab of the research section, and there you'll be able to see a link where you can become a member to the website. And that's just going to require you to fill in some basic details about who you are and what your interest is in these data. And then once you become a member of the website, you'll be able to see this member content section where you can then click on the view data at the bottom. And that's going to bring you to this landing page where you have an overview document of the Biopath study and of the rich data that we've collected for this study. And you'll see there as well in the document are a number of embedded links that will take you to the data dictionary and an interactive code book that will allow you to browse through our data so that you can get a better sense of what is available and gather some ideas of how you might be able to use this data for your own purposes or in collaboration with us. And as you can see, as Annisha scrolls through it, we've got summaries of all the different data types that are available. So this first landing page just gives you a great general overview of what would be available and some little tips and hints on how best to use these data for your purposes. So that covers the data section. And like I said, all that requires is for you to become a free member of our website. Great. Thank you so much, Annisha.
Thanks a lot, for the short introduction to the website. So please feel free to explore the website. We will keep building and adding on to the website. I also need to just mention quickly that as we now go through the different presentations, there'll be opportunities to ask questions after each presentation. If you have any question, please just put them in the chat. We will monitor the chat and we'll select as many questions as possible for discussion. If you have more specific questions, or if you're not able to answer your question today, feel free to contact the speaker directly or send us an email at info@globalmentalhealthresearch.com. We put this address into the chat as well. Finally, the webinar will be recorded and the recording and the slides will be made available on our website. I'm going to talk about a relatively new paper on supporting the mental health of forcibly displaced children. This paper is a collaboration with my co-authors Catherine Panter-Brick from Yale University and Felicity Brown from UNICEF. And it recently came out in Nature Review Psychology. This is an invited paper. We've been asked to write a review on that, and we took a lot of time and effort to put this together. What's really nice is that Catherine Panter-Brick suggested to also create a video that summarizes the paper. So that has been launched recently as well. You can find it by scanning the QR code here, and then I also included the link. And I thought I would will share this video now. It's just 2 minutes. So in the paper, we basically review the literature on forcibly displaced children. And what we do in the beginning, we provide some context for that. So based on data that is the most recently available data from the 2023, so the new data should be coming out soon, there were 47.2 million forcibly displaced children, which is the highest number since the Second World War. Now, most of these children are based in low and middle income countries, and you can see on this figure, on this map that we put together with the help of UNICEF, that most of the forcibly displaced children are based in the countries that are colored dark red, so that in Central Africa, Middle East, Asia, as well as South America. And then the blue colors are where we have fewer displaced children. So you can see how most of those forcibly displaced children are in specific areas, and most of them are coming just from a few countries. And most of them reside, as I mentioned earlier, in low and middle income contexts, with only a few of them migrating into high income countries. We then talk in the paper about the prevalence of mental health conditions amongst this population. And according to 7 systematic reviews, we do find that there is a broad range of prevalence rates across mental disorders. For example, with PTSD, we do find the widest range from 4.5% of a prevalence rate to almost 90%. With depression, it ranges from 3 to 55. With anxiety, it ranges from 8 to 33%. Well, reasons for this heterogeneity is that, firstly, these studies include sample populations with very different backgrounds. Some are high risk, some are relatively low risk in high income contexts, whereas others are in low middle income countries living in very difficult circumstances. There are also differences regarding age and various different places across the globe. So that would explain some of the differences that we see. Another reason is that there are methodological differences. So in most cases, mental health has been measured with self-report measures that often have not been validated in the particular context that they have been applied, versus some studies that use clinical professional assessments to assess mental health. The third reason is that generally the challenge is that much of the research is applying Western clinical models and measures to other cultures without sufficient cultural adaptation and validation. Another thing that I think is really important to mention as well is that many of these studies just focus on one dimension of mental health. A study might just focus on PTSD, but is not considering depression, anxiety. In our research from the BioPath study, when we actually consider mental health across multiple dimensions, we do find prevalence rates that are fairly high. So in the BioPath study, we found a prevalence rate of 58% for any mental health disorder. So there is clearly a significant mental health burden in displaced children. But not all children are affected equally. So the next section, the paper covers that the topic of resilience, that children differ in their response to adversity, that between 20 to 80%, depending on the study design, of displaced children do not develop mental health problems and would be considered as being resilient by many. Now, these individual differences are influenced by various risk and resilience factors across different system levels. So there are individual factors that are associated with risk or resilience, but there are also factors on the family level, such as the parenting, the mental health of the parents, their community levels, such as acceptance within the community, access to services, and societal factors, such as cultural aspects. In addition, we make the case in the paper that children do differ as well in response to both risk and resilience factors as a function of their individual level of sensitivity. And Andrew may will talk a little bit more about that. But basically, sensitivity captures a temperament trait associated with increased sensitivity to the environment. That means more sensitive children are more affected by both negative experiences, but also respond more to positive experiences. So this is something that needs to be considered as well, that explains some of those individual differences that we see. Importantly, even though there is a high mental health burden, most forcibly displaced children never receive treatment. So we have a very high treatment gap of close to 97%. That means 97% of the children that have a need for treatment never receive any help. There are various reasons for that. One reason is the general lack of resources, that there is little investment in mental health. In many of those low and middle income countries, there are not many mental health professionals, there are not many mental health services. That's associated with little resources being invested. Second reason is limited access to available services because of the lack of transport or costs associated with that, or clinics, services being delivered in clinics only at certain times, which are incompatible with the work schedule or school schedule of these children. And then the last point is really important as well, is that sometimes we do find a low demand, even though people and these children meet our criteria for mental health problems, there is limited awareness that they feel they need treatment, and there's also concerns of stigma. This all leads to our observation that current services might lack contextual relevance, that they fail to address the complex situations of these communities, and that mental health is often associated with the current social and economic circumstances and not just the trauma of war and displacement. The next section in detail covers what we know about interventions. So I'm not going to be able to go into much detail here, but basically what we find when we look at all the evidence out there is that the evidence for mental health and psychosocial support programs is relatively limited. Most current interventions do focus on individual factors, and there are some positive effects for PTSD, but there's no consistent effects for other disorders. Family-based and school-based approaches appear to be particularly promising, but there is little evaluation of those kinds of interventions in humanitarian contexts. Much of the evidence comes from high-income countries. There's also the importance of engaging the community. So there's big promise for community-based approaches, but very little empirical data available on these. Furthermore, most intervention approaches originate from Western contexts and with limited cultural adaptation and evaluation thereof. So our recommendation for conclusion of our analysis of the current knowledge that we have and empirical evidence that we have is that we need to conduct more high-quality research. This requires longitudinal studies that apply mixed methods, that consider multiple dimensions of mental health, but also adaptive outcomes. So more research is needed of high quality that goes beyond cross-sectional designs. Furthermore, we need interventions that consider the socio-ecological context, the lived reality of displaced children. Much of the mental health that they experience might be caused by the chronic stress that they're exposed to rather than the trauma of war. And that also leads to the next point, which is that we need to adopt a systems perspective. We can't just look at the children isolated from all the other systems that they're developing within. So we need to consider families, communities, and society and how all that interacts and interplays in impacting the mental health of these children. We also need more implementation research to see how these interventions can be delivered, including stepped care models that are often proposed. And further, and finally, the cultural adaptation is absolutely key. This requires active engagement and collaboration and co-creation with communities and local partners. So this is just a quick summary of the paper. I'd like to thank my co-authors, Professor Catherine Panterbrick and Dr. Felicity Brown. I also like to thank our editor at Nature Review Psychology, Dr. Jimena Goldberg, and I'd like to thank the colleagues at UNICEF for providing the data for the figure on displaced children across the globe. And we have a few minutes for questions, if there are any. Okay, there's one question. Did you notice if there are improvements over time in terms of quality research and on families? I think that there is some recent research that is of high quality, and there has been obviously a lot of work and a lot of activity in research. Many people attending here are involved in that. And I think there is a move towards considering families and community-based approaches. But when we reviewed the literature, that was still relatively limited. There's a question on how would longitudinal studies be conducted with the uncertain conditions of displaced children. That is a good question. That's a big challenge. So we've conducted a longitudinal study with the BioPath project, and it is very challenging to longitudinally follow these children because of the high mobility. So it's very challenging. That's one of the reasons we have little research. So I think that requires working with local partners that might be able to track people. And yeah, I guess we just have to really advance the field by tackling those challenges and trying to do at least longitudinal research that covers at least a little bit of time that goes beyond just cross-sectional designs. And some questions about the presentation. Yes, we will share the presentation after, as well as the recording. The treatment gap is huge. What can be done, at least to help bridge it a little in this context? I think that's a very important topic to address. More work needs to be done on that. The first one is to really identify the specific reasons for the treatment gap. So we have done some work on that, other people as well. I think the big challenge for me seems to be to provide those services in a way that it works for the people in need. So when we provided mental health treatment over telephone, we were able to reach more people than we are when we ask them to come to the clinic at a certain time. So being more flexible in how services are being delivered, but also in a way that it reduces stigma. And I think there's great promise in anchoring the services in the communities and involve the communities directly and have community-based approaches. Great. We'll have to move on, but I thank you very much for the questions. So we'll now hand over to the next presentation from Andrew May.
Yes, hello again, everyone. So I'm looking forward to telling you about the results of our most recent publication titled Predictors of Environmental Sensitivity in Syrian Refugee Children. To give you some background to this study, it's a well-established fact now that children differ in their response to environmental context. So in other words, children can have very different mental health and well-being outcomes, even if they come from identical settings, for example, a pair of siblings from the same household, and even under highly adverse conditions, as is often the case for refugee children, which Michael alluded to earlier in his presentation. So a dominant question in developmental psychology research has been, well, why do children respond differently? And after synthesizing decades of research on this topic, we now know that part of the reason why children vary in their response can be attributed to the trait of environmental sensitivity. And for those of you who are new to this trait, it's helpful to think about it from the perspective of our nervous systems. So although structurally we all have the same nervous system, the way our nervous systems function differs along a continuum in much the same way as other human traits such as height, skin color, hair color, metabolism, and so on. So at one end of the spectrum, we find children who are less sensitive. And these are children that can manage and typically enjoy highly stimulating activities. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, we find children who are highly sensitive, who are easily overwhelmed by excessive stimulation, and who tend to prefer calmer, quieter pursuits. So why is it important to make this distinction? Well, when categorizing children by their levels of sensitivity, psychologists have found that less sensitive children seem to cope sufficiently well in most situations. In other words, their mental health remains relatively stable, even when the going starts to get tough. In contrast, highly sensitive children will thrive or struggle in direct proportion to their context. So they have the most mental health problems in adverse environments, but the least problems when they are sufficiently supported and nurtured. So in one of our previous publications, we confirmed that highly sensitive refugee children have the highest burden of mental health problems. But in our current analyses, we're actually seeing that high sensitivity may serve as a protective factor and may help to alleviate existing mental health symptoms when children are properly nurtured and cared for. So you may be wondering what factors actually determine a child's level of sensitivity. And thanks to a recent study, we've been able to confirm that sensitivity is a multifactorial trait. So in other words, it's influenced by both genetic and environmental factors, both nature and nurture. But what we still don't understand very well is which are the specific environmental factors that help to calibrate a child's level of sensitivity. And this is especially true for the refugee context. So the aim of this particular study, we wanted to identify predictors of environmental sensitivity in our large cohorts of Syrian refugee children. And to do this, we assessed over 40 variables characterizing the lives of over 1,000 Syrian refugee children to see which of these associated with sensitivity levels. And we wanted to do this because knowing what factors seem to predict sensitivity levels could help us to match children to interventions that suit their sensitivity levels, ultimately helping to improve their mental health and well-being. So the participants for this particular study were 1,409 children and their biological mothers from the BioPath study. And in terms of data collection, children and their moms completed a comprehensive set of questionnaires that were administered by trained research staff. So these questionnaires assessed a range of different variables across 3 categories. The first of these was at the individual level. So we collected data on children's self-reported sensitivity, their gender, and their age. At the family level, we gathered information on parenting and behavioral control, the home life, conflict and abuse, and maternal mental health. And at the community level, we recorded data on the neighborhood quality, reports of bullying of the child outside of the family home, and the degree of war exposure that they had experienced. So to test whether any of these variables were associated with sensitivity levels, we made use of a statistical technique called multivariate adaptive regression splines. And this is quite similar to your standard linear regression, except in this case, instead of fitting a single line to the data, we pieced a series of lines together in order to generate our statistical models. So in our main analysis, we found that sensitivity is associated with a diverse set of 11 different variables, and these are listed in the diagram left to right, top to bottom in terms of their overall importance. But just to zone in on the strongest predictors of sensitivity, these included behavioral control, which is a measure of how carefully parents monitor their children and set consistent behavioral expectations. Positive home experiences, a measure of the frequency of parental presence and to what extent children considered their home to be a fun and safe place to be. Maternal anxiety, a measure of various symptoms of anxiety. Human insecurity, a general measure of mom's sense of danger and instability. And then lastly, child-reported abuse, a measure of all forms of abuse, including both physical and verbal. And as you can see from the graphs, as these variables increased, so too did children's levels of reported sensitivity. In one of our many additional analyses, we checked how these predictors changed in importance for children of different ages and genders. So, for example, children younger than 10, their sensitivity was strongly influenced by maternal acceptance and abuse. But for children older than 10, behavioral control became really important, and they seemed to start picking up on mom's sense of insecurity. The sensitivity in boys was strongly influenced by positive home experiences and behavioral control, whereas sensitivity in girls correlated more to maternal anxiety and to their level of war exposure. So what's really interesting about this set of identifiers that we found is that they suggest that high sensitivity develops in children under 2 contrasting conditions. So in the for better condition, we are seeing that higher sensitivity emerges in children in positive home environments that have firm and consistent parenting. And in the for worse condition, we're seeing that higher child sensitivity is associated with threatening, abusive environments that are dominated by anxiety-prone mothers. So these findings actually very closely match developmental psychology theory, which has long predicted that environmental sensitivity heightens in children that are in either highly supportive or highly adverse conditions. And the reason for this is because environmental sensitivity is a trait that is useful in both those scenarios. So either it helps children to be more alert to danger around them, or it helps children to be more receptive to being nurtured and cared for. And so by developing this information further, we're becoming slowly better equipped to be able to identify and sort children by their levels of sensitivity. And this will hopefully allow us in the long term to match children to interventions that suit their sensitivity levels to help better care for their mental health. So that just leaves me to thank the funders of the study and to all the various people that made the BioPath project such a success. And thank you as well for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
Maybe just want to add that the trait of sensitivity can be measured relatively easily with a questionnaire. And we've done that in the BioPath study, both in the children and the caregivers. And it emerged as one of the key predictors of risk and mental health. So it's a measure that's relatively new. Not many people use it, but it really emerges as a key factor associated with the risk for mental health problems. There's one question, Andrew, about do you have any recommendations for interventions in this setting based on these results?
I think that's a really good and important question. And I think, as many of us know, there's a long journey between basic research and then finding ways to apply these results to interventions ultimately. But I think this does provide us clues. I think it reaffirms the idea that children need to be treated in a personalized way. It fits in with the current trajectory of personalized medicine, of treating individuals based on their specific backgrounds and their individual traits. So I think more and more there seems to be good evidence to suggest that these are how we should be structuring interventions in future, and how we should plan, especially refugee interventions for highly sensitive children, to make sure that they get the support that they need.
Maybe we can mention as well that it's the highly sensitive children that seem to benefit particularly strongly from interventions. So these children are at higher risk to develop mental health problems if they are in a very challenging environment, but they also seem to be responding more strongly to interventions. Now, the evidence for that comes not from displaced children, comes from other disadvantaged children and school-based interventions, but these children have great potential to benefit from treatment and interventions. There's a further question. Do we know whether sensitivity can have an effect on help-seeking behavior?
So I think I might have to pass this one to you, Michael, but I know that there are different correlations between coping strategies for sensitivity, for different levels of sensitivity. So I don't know if you know specifically about help-seeking behavior as a coping strategy.
So we have recently done some work on different types of highly sensitive individuals. That was not based on children, but on young adults. And there are some differences in coping. So generally, we do find that the more sensitive people are, the more they engage in all coping strategies, whether that's problem-focused coping, emotion-focused coping, or avoidance-focused coping. But individuals that have this sensitivity towards more positive experiences, they tend to engage in more problem-focused coping and less in avoidance and emotion-focused coping. So I would expect that sensitivity would also have an influence on help seeking, and that sensitive children might have a better sense of who to ask for help. But that they also benefit particularly strongly from social support and the help that they would receive. Great. We are perfectly on time. So we move to the next presentation from Dr. Hend Eltanamly from University of Utrecht. So Hend, feel free to share your slides.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Let me see if I can share my screen. It worked, right?
Perfect. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yes. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for the very interesting presentation, Andrew and Michael. The review is quite intriguing. I'll add it to my teaching list for next year. I'll be talking about a phenomenon that's quite prevalent in forcibly displaced children, but is not often addressed in research, and that is the phenomena of being forcibly separated from one's father. This is something that happens often. We see now, for example, in the case of Ukrainian families, that a lot of the children are separated from fathers who are restrained at the fighting front. Also in the US, a few years ago, there was that forced separation between families, like children from their parents. And of course, this happens often with refugee children as well. So basically, this is founded in attachment theory. This idea that being separated from one's father can have a bad effect on how children grow up is founded in attachment theory, and that's one of the basic human needs, is to form strong emotional bonds with others, and especially with one's caregivers, such as mothers and fathers, of course. And these early bonds or attachments are important for how we function and how we feel throughout life. And sometimes we form different attachments depending on the way that we are treated by our parents and how dependable we thought they were when we were growing up. So if a child feels safe and cared for, they usually develop what we call a secure attachment. This means that they can manage their emotions quite well. They feel comfortable going to their parent for comfort and support. However, if a child's relationship with their caregiver is more uncertain or stressful, they might develop what we call an insecure attachment. This makes it harder for the children to manage their feelings and relationships. So we know also from research that sensitive, responsive parenting, basically, so when the parents notice what their child needs and they respond in a way that caters for that need, helps children to trust others and to feel safe in the world and to explore the world out there. So children grow and learn through a balance of two things: feeling safe with a caregiver, the attachment figure, but also feeling confident to explore their surroundings and exploration. So on the one hand, they have to have this secure attachment, but on the other hand, they have to feel safe enough to be able to explore the world. So when a child is upset, they look for comfort from their caregiver. And when they feel safe, they're more likely to go out, play, and learn new things. And this balance is key for healthy development, and it helps children learn, adapt, and build strong relationships as they grow. So the idea here is that fathers play a unique role in this process. So while mothers are often seen as this safe haven, fathers are seen as a secure base, which basically means that they play this unique and important role supporting the exploration of their children. In many cultures, its fathers are more likely than mothers to engage in exciting and rough and tumble play with their children. These kinds of interactions encourage children to take risks, but also to test their limits. And in doing so, it builds their confidence. So while mothers are often seen as the safe haven that children turn to when they're upset, they need comfort, fathers, on the other hand, are seen as the secure base. So the ones who encourage the children to step out, try new things, and learn from challenges. This role is very important because exploring and taking risk help children learn how to manage their emotions and how to interact with others, because without it, they would just be confined in the safe haven in a way. But fathers also help their children learn how to understand other people's emotions and how to express their own feelings as well. And in course of doing so, they hone their children's social skills, which leads to better social skills and therefore also better social relationships. So when children are separated from their fathers, when they have to grow up without a father, whether that separation is because of war, the father migrated to find a better job elsewhere, divorce, or other reasons, they might miss out on these valuable experiences. So this can make it harder for the children to manage their feelings, cope with stress, and develop healthy relationships. So they miss out on learning how to deal with their emotions in a healthy way. This can lead to unhelpful ways of coping, which may cause problems later on, such as elevated levels of depression, anxiety, or even aggression. But what we know from research is that, so there is some research about children who grow up without a father, but most of the research comes from diverse families. And every child's story is different. So children can be separated due to war, migration, divorce, or even the father being in prison or death. But each of these experiences leaves its own mark on children. And what a child went through before and during that separation can deeply shape how a child copes later on. But for these reasons, it's not easy to assume that what we know from, for example, children from incarcerated families or children from divorced families, that we can easily extend that to refugee children who are separated because of the war. So, for example, children who are separated due to incarceration of their dads might face different challenges before the separation itself. And that research shows that children, the circumstances that are surrounding the separation from father can be marked by family conflict, violence, or stress. But also, these are not necessarily the same as those facing children of forced displacement. So the specific situation of being separated from one's father as a result of war, what happens here usually is that fathers often take the great risk to try to protect their children. So they leave sometimes to apply for asylum, and then their absence is not just a loss, but it's the result of war, of the trauma, of survival decisions. Children left behind face more than just the separation. They also feel the instability, not knowing when they will see their fathers again, if ever, loss of safety, and a world that's turned upside down in a way. Why this matters? So we know that war tears families apart, but to truly understand how losing a father affects refugee children, what we need to do is to compare children, who, like from a research standpoint, those who grow up with a father to those who grow up without a father. But of course, for a good reason, we cannot do that experimentally, and I'm not promoting to do that. But I mean, nature just provides us with these situations. So, with a biopath study, a lot of the children growing up there have been subjected to that kind of natural experiment. So, some of them indeed did not grow up with their dads, while others were still with their fathers. And we believe that those who were separated from their fathers would have experienced more trauma, again, because the fathers might be the ones providing more protection. They might be living in worse living conditions. But also, we expected that this father separation can cast its effect on children by impacting mothers. So basically, mothers who are carrying the full weight of parenting in times of extreme stress and also uncertainty, not knowing if she will be reunited with her partner again, that they might struggle to stay warm and supportive towards their children, and sometimes might even engage in harsh or emotionally distant parenting. So the combination of the father loss, but also the parenting strain from the mother can take a toll on children, which can affect their mental health, confidence, and behavior. And understanding their experiences can help us respond with compassion and design support that truly meets their needs. So what did we do? Between October and Jan 2017 to 2018, in Lebanon, we visited, so the research team of Biopath visited informal settlements in Lebanon, where there were a lot of refugee families. And we specifically chose areas with a lot of refugees. We focused on children living with their mothers. And then they were interviewed separately. The children and the mothers were interviewed separately in Arabic. We ended up, from the almost 1,600 families that took part in the study, around 370 were separated from their fathers. The children were asked about the rates of depression, anxiety, PTSD symptoms, self-efficacy, which is that belief that you're capable to overcome challenges in life, and self-esteem, which is how much you think you're worthy of love and support. And also, we asked them about how their mothers treated them. So basically, the maternal acceptance, control, abuse, and neglect. And the mothers were asked about the war-related event that they and their children have seen, the quality of the living conditions, but also we asked the mothers about the children's behavior in terms of aggression, hyperactivity, and attention problems. What we found out was that, similar to what we had anticipated, that children who were separated from their fathers indeed faced more war-related events. They lived in worse conditions. They were more likely to not go to school. They showed higher levels of depression and PTSD, but also they felt less confident about their own abilities and felt that they were less worthy of love and support. And even after considering the effects, so statistically speaking, that means after controlling for the level of war exposure that they have seen and the type of how impoverished living conditions they were in, father separation still was linked to more depression in children, lower confidence in their abilities, and lower self-esteem. And it did not increase children's anxiety, it did not relate to higher levels of anxiety, PTSD, or behavior problems. What we also found out was that the way mothers parented their children did not explain why children separated from their fathers had more depression or lower self-esteem. So, in other words, even when mothers were supportive and caring, being apart from their fathers still had its own negative impact on children's mental health. So, the direct effect of father separation on children remained there regardless of the parenting. This means that father separation itself directly affected children's well-being beyond the influence of how their mothers parented them. What we also found out is that even though being separated from their fathers had a direct negative effect on children, we also found that the way that the mothers parented still mattered for the children's well-being. So supportive and caring parenting by mothers helped children cope better, even in such very difficult circumstances. And while good parenting could not fully prevent the negative effect of father separation, it still played an important role in helping those children feel better and manage the challenges. It's important to also note that this study, we gathered a lot of data from both parents and their children, which gives us kind of the full picture. So we did not only take one perspective, but we combined both. We have a large sample, which makes our findings more reliable, so we can trust our findings there. But we also have to bear in mind that we collected this data at one time point, which means that we do not know, we cannot draw causality from this study. So, for example, we do not know much about things that happened before the fathers left. These are things that we also did not measure. We also did not measure the children's attachment with the fathers and mothers directly. We can also make deductions about it. As a take-home message, what we can say is that being separated from their fathers has a distinct and harmful impact on refugee children's mental health and confidence beyond the effects of war and hardship, and that a strong and secure relationships are key to helping these children heal and thrive. And at the end, I would like also to thank the BioPath team and the funders for making this work possible. I'll stop sharing this screen, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, and yes, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat. I think it's really an important study because we don't read about many studies that focus on father absence, and father absence obviously is fairly common in children exposed to war and have a history of war and displacement, especially in the Ukraine, where the men had to stay back whilst mothers and children, or many of them, were leaving the country. There's one question on at what age is a lack of attachment to fathers most critical?
Yeah, well, I think from earlier work, we know that the early years matter. And this is also what we find here in the study that, so we did run moderation by age. And indeed, we find that it was more harmful for younger children, especially for their trauma symptoms and their self-esteem.
Great, thank you. There was another question about who are the local partners in Lebanon in this study. So our local partners were IDRAC, Professor Eli Karam and his team, who have very extensive experience in mental health, the leading mental health charity in Lebanon, and we were working with Médecins du Monde, or Doctors of the World, for the data collection. comment from Tanya Bosky that they found that fathers were very important in their study in family intervention. The father attendance increased adolescent well-being outcome. Again, highlighting the important role of fathers. Then one question, are there any differences on roles of parents in different cultures?
Yeah, I think that's a very hot topic in the field indeed. But what we find here, I guess, so the assumptions here is that fathers take that more, they put the children out there, right? They protect the children. They're the providers for the children. And what we see is that children who are separated from the fathers indeed had seen more war-related experiences, which means that we can only imply that the protective role was compromised. Of course, we cannot ascertain that that was the case. But just from looking at the differences between these two groups, we can deduce that this protective role was compromised among those children.
Thank you very much. There's some further interesting findings that Catherine Panterbrick just posted in the chat. However, we are at the end of the webinar, so we will end here, but I'd really like to thank you for joining us. Please have a look at the website, especially the blogs, where we provide information on all the studies that you've heard about today and many more. And also feel free to sign up for the newsletter to receive updates on new papers and events such as this webinar. Feel free to sign up for the free membership if you want to get access to information on the BioPath data and explore the potential for collaboration. This webinar has been recorded, and we will make the recording and the slides available in the next few days or as soon as possible on our website, and we will let you know via the newsletter. I would like to thank all the presenters as well as the team behind the website and all the different projects. There's many people involved in data collection and data analysis and write-up. We're very grateful for all those collaborators, particularly the many study participants who gave their time to contribute to this study. Finally, thanks for your interest in our work and for attending this webinar. Hopefully, we'll see you at the next one. All the best until then. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you very much.